After a week away, the Ocho Points Podcast is returning. This week on the show, we will cover Phil Robertson, Brock Lesnar, WrestleMania, Future Shop, and a bit of baseball. Let's get things started. As I said at the top of the show, we are back after a week off. I decided to take last week off to recover from the terrible cold that I was going through. The week before, I sounded extremely horrible. I sound horrible anyways, but the couple of weeks that I was suffering through the cold, I sounded really horrible, so I decided to not record a podcast. So we've got a lot to jam into this week's episode. First of all, I'd like to say Happy Easter to everybody. I am recording this on the Saturday night before Easter. I'm hoping to have this up at some point Easter Sunday. And if it's not up on Easter Sunday, well, I hope everybody had a good Easter. First thing I want to talk about off the top of the show is Future Shop. It was announced last weekend that Future Shop here in Canada is closed. Not will be closing, but is closed. For those of you unfamiliar with Future Shop was basically the Canadian version of Best Buy. Best Buy ended up buying out Future Shop in Canada back in 2001, but they still tried to keep the two brands separated. However, they finally decided that Best Buy is just going to completely take over, and they decided to shut down Future Shop altogether. Now, I don't want to get too much into this, and I still don't know the full logistics or the full scenario of exactly what happened, but I've read some interviews online with a couple of former Future Shop employees that said that they basically went into work last Saturday morning not knowing that their store was going to be closed, only to be locked out and to find signs on the windows saying that their stores were closed. So it sounds like Future Shop didn't even give their employees a heads up as to the fact that they were going to close down. They just decided to rip the proverbial band-aid right off and just close down without making any sort of announcement. Now, I don't know how much I can say. I don't really want to get into any trouble for saying anything, but I think the way Future Shop handled this is really shitty. I've worked in retail for almost 10 years. I've worked at a company that I've absolutely loved. Well, I've loved every company that I've worked at. However, one of the companies that I worked at ended up closing down the store that I was working at. And I thought that was in a pretty terrible fashion because we found out about it from the hot dog vendor outside of our store. But I can't imagine the feeling of going into work on a Saturday morning only to be locked out and greeted with signs saying that your store is closed. That is just, in my opinion, cowardly of Future Shop. Now, again, I don't want to say too much else because I don't want to say anything that might get me in trouble with anyone. So I will leave it at that. Future Shop is closing. Some of the stores are going to be converting into Best Buys, but overall, 1,500 people are now without jobs. From somebody that spent a year unemployed, it sucks not having work. So I wish nothing but the best to all those people that are now unemployed and stuck trying to figure out what their next move is going to be. Again, I wish them all the best of luck. From there, I would like to talk about Phil Robertson. Some of you may know Phil Robertson as the patriarch of the Duck Dynasty guys. He is the father of the guys on the show of Duck Dynasty. He is also a preacher or a minister of some sort. He's a very religious person, and he was under fire about a year ago for making comments that were deemed to be homophobic. And last week he's now gone on attack against atheists. In a sermon that he was given or participating in, Robertson got up in front of an audience and basically took it to atheists. This is the quote he gave. Imagine two guys break into an atheist's home. He has a little atheist wife and two little atheist daughters. Two guys break into his home and tie him up in a chair and gag him. Then they take his two daughters in front of him and rape both of them and then shoot them. And they take his wife and then decapitate her head off in front of him, and then they can look at him and say, "Isn't it great that I don't have to worry about being judged? Isn't it great that there's nothing wrong with this? There's no right or wrong now, is there, dude?" He was basically saying this because atheists don't believe in God, and therefore, in Phil Robertson's mind, they don't believe in the morality of good and evil. And he was using this as an example to show, well, in an atheist mind, rape, decapitation, and castration must be okay because there's no God, there's no almighty judge and jury, so therefore there's no right and wrong. Listen, I believe in free speech. When Phil Robertson came out and made his homophobic comments last year, I can't remember exactly what it was he said, but when he made his homophobic comments last year and A&E threatened to take Duck Dynasty off the air, actually I think they did take it off the air for a bit before a lot of people ended up complaining. But anyways, when he said what he said last year, I defended him saying he has the right to free speech even if you don't necessarily agree with him. As somebody who, I wouldn't call myself an atheist, but I would consider myself more agnostic. And as somebody who considers myself agnostic and tends to lean more towards the atheist side, again, I don't agree with what Phil Robertson is saying. It's some pretty fucked up shit, but I do believe in his First Amendment right to say it. Even if A&E threatened to cancel his show again because of these comments, which I don't think they have, but even if they did, again, I would say that's the wrong thing to do. He does have the freedom of speech under the First Amendment. No matter how fucked up the shit is that he's saying, he has the right to say it as long as he's not threatening to do harm to people. And this is one where it's a very fine line. He's not threatening harm. He's using a hypothetical scenario of harm to back up his religious beliefs. And under freedom of speech, I believe he has the right to do that. Now, if he does continue to keep making these just stupid, ridiculous comments, you're not going to have to cancel his show because people are just going to start turning the show off because they're not going to want to listen to this idiot keep babbling on about ridiculous bullshit. Now, I know there are a lot of people who will still watch the show because they have the same beliefs as Phil Robertson, but after a while, people get sick of hearing this stupid stuff and they turn away. So don't threaten to cancel his show over comments like this or over his homophobic comments. Just let him keep saying the stuff the First Amendment allows him to say, and eventually people will just decide to tune away from his show, and then the ratings will drop so low that A&E will be forced to take it off due to bad ratings, not due to oppression of free speech. That's just my 2 cents on the matter. And from Phil Robertson, I want to talk a little bit about the Indiana anti-gay legislation, is what I'm going to call it. I haven't had a chance to look too much into this, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about it and making myself look like an ass. But from what I do know, basically, Indiana has passed a law which makes it legal for restaurants to refuse service to homosexual couples. Now, again, I don't know if that's 100% accurate. That's the bits and pieces that I've picked up on this. A little independent restaurant has decided to run with this legislation. I believe the place is called Mysteries Pizza. I don't remember exactly the name of it, but basically they've decided to run with this law that Indiana has implemented, and they have come out and said that they will not cater weddings for homosexual couples trying to get married. This caused a huge amount of backlash towards them. It even forced them to shut down their restaurant for a couple of days. However, they started a GoFundMe campaign, which is similar to Kickstarter, to get their business back on track, and astonishingly, it raised over $800,000. So they're going to get their business up and running again. Now, I personally think this is wrong. This to me, doesn't fall into the same situation as Phil Robertson's right to freedom of speech. This isn't freedom of speech. This is basically oppressing a group based on their sexual orientation. This isn't just saying, oh, we don't believe in gay marriage. This is basically saying that if you're gay and you want to get married, we are not going to serve you in our restaurant. That is discrimination. That is not freedom of speech. That's not fucking freedom of religion. That is discrimination, and it's wrong. And I never want to say that a business should be shut down because I don't want to see people unemployed, but I would like to see a lack of support for this business. I hope customers stay away from this place of business until they decide to change their minds. And I hope Indiana decides to change their minds on this law, because this law is a law of discrimination. From there, let's jump into the world of sports. Big news was made last week as WWE superstar Brock Lesnar announced last Wednesday or Thursday, I can't remember exactly which day it was, but he announced that he was going to re-sign with the WWE. Now, Brock Lesnar's contract with the WWE was set to expire last Sunday after WrestleMania, and he hadn't yet signed a new contract, so there was a lot of speculation about the possibility of Brock Lesnar going back to the UFC, where he was their heavyweight champion a couple of years ago. However, Brock put an end to the speculation, as I said, when he announced mid last week, that he was going to be re-signing with the WWE. I'm paraphrasing here, but basically he said at the end of the day, he likes to entertain people, and for his health and for his family, the schedule that WWE gives him is a lot better for him at this stage in his life. Brock Lesnar he's basically a part-time worker in the WWE making full-time money. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are going to resent him for that, but I think that's the goal everyone would love to have. I mean, who wouldn't want to work part-time hours and get paid full-time dollars for it? Everyone would love that. Brock Lesnar managed to do it, so congratulations to him. Now that brings us to WrestleMania. As I've already mentioned, WrestleMania took place last Sunday. It was WrestleMania 31 from the San Francisco area in California. I believe it actually took place in Santa Clara at Levi's Stadium. This was the first WrestleMania that I've watched in 9 years. The last WrestleMania I watched was WrestleMania 22 in Chicago. And as I mentioned on my very first podcast, I am going to be starting a wrestling podcast with my buddy Josh in the upcoming weeks. So that's why I'm getting back into wrestling, and it's why this is the first WrestleMania that I've watched in 9 years. And it was a really good show. I didn't watch any of the WWE programming leading into it, although I heard the build to this year's WrestleMania was really, really bad. A lot of people were expecting WrestleMania to be really bad based on the build-up alone, but from the reviews, it exceeded all expectations of what people had going into it, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. The first match, they had two matches before the main WrestleMania event took place. They had a 4-team tag team match for the tag team titles, and they had the second annual Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. Now, I didn't see either of those two matches, so I'm not going to comment on those. But the first match of the main event of WrestleMania was a 7-man ladder match for the Intercontinental title, which was won by Daniel Bryan. From there was a match between Randy Orton and Seth Rollins. The finish to this match was crazy. Basically, Seth Rollins went to hit Randy Orton with his finishing move, the curb stomp, and as Seth was jumping in the air to complete the move, Randy Orton got up from the mat, caught Seth Rollins in midair, and Randy gave Seth his finishing move, the RKO, and man, it doesn't, trying to describe it on an audio podcast doesn't do it justice. You really have to see a video of this move. It was just absolutely phenomenal the way they pulled it off, and man, I was stunned. Up next, we had Triple H versus Sting in a no disqualification match. This was basically the face of WWE versus the face of WCW, essentially. And this match basically resulted in two of the biggest 90s factions in wrestling making an appearance. Both D-Generation X and the NWO came out to interfere in this matchup. Eventually, Triple H did defeat Sting, but for 90s wrestling fans, there was a lot of good nostalgia in this match. A lot that didn't make sense, seeing as how a lot of the guys in the NWO were actually good friends with Triple H, and they were supposed to be against him in this match. So it was a little weird on that front, but for a nostalgia point of view, it was good and fun, and a lot of 90s kids enjoyed that match. Up next was AJ Lee and Paige versus the Bella Twins. I did not get a chance to see this match because my feed for the event cut out during this match, but AJ Lee and Paige ended up getting the win when AJ got a submission hold on one of the Bella Twins. I don't know which one's which, but basically AJ Lee got a submission hold on one of the Bella Twins. They submit it. AJ Lee and Paige are your victors. Up next, we had John Cena versus Rusev for the U.S. Championship. Rusev was the undefeated Russian machine and the current United States champion versus Captain America, John Cena. John Cena ended up winning this match. It was an alright match, wasn't personally my favorite match of the evening, but Rusev's entrance was amazing. He came out in a tank, and it was phenomenal. But John Cena ended up defeating Rusev, ending his undefeated streak, and becoming the new WWE United States Champion. We then had The Undertaker up against Bray Wyatt, and Undertaker beat Bray Wyatt to move to 22-1 at WrestleMania. Of course, if you follow wrestling last year, Undertaker was defeated by Brock Lesnar, and that ended his undefeated streak at WrestleMania. Up until that point, he was 21-0 at WrestleManias. It was a streak that basically no one really thought was ever going to be broken, just because Undertaker's getting up there in age, and basically it got to the point where you knew every year that Undertaker was going to win at WrestleMania. So it caught a lot of people by surprise last year when he lost. However, he goes over this year, defeats Bray Wyatt, and he's now 22-1 in WrestleMania. The main event saw Brock Lesnar, the WWE Heavyweight Champion, versus Roman Reigns, and Brock Lesnar decided to take Roman Reigns to, as he said, Suplex City. He gave Roman Reigns 10 suplexes throughout the night. And of course, at one point, he just yelled, "Welcome to Suplex City, bitch." And this, of course, launched a fury of Suplex City shirts on sale online at various online shops. And coincidentally enough, I do have a Suplex City shirt that I am currently selling, and it's the sponsor of this week's show. So if you would like to help support this show, and if you're a fan of wrestling, I will provide a link in the description for the shirt on YouTube. And if you want to grab a pen and a piece of paper, if you're interested, you can check it out at www.teespring.com/SUPcity. That's teespring.com/SUPcity. Anyways, back to the match. Brock Lesnar hit Roman Reigns with 10 suplexes throughout this match and 3 or 4 F5s. Near the end of the match, Brock Lesnar hit Roman Reigns with the final F5, and he was all set to pin him and get the victory and retain his title. All of a sudden, Seth Rollins' music hit. Seth Rollins was the Money in the Bank winner, so he had an open contract to compete for the WWE title anytime he so desires, and he took this opportunity to come in. He did his finishing move, the curb stomp, to Brock Lesnar, which got Brock Lesnar out of the ring. He then delivered another curb stomp to Roman Reigns, covered Roman Reigns, and became the new WWE champion. Overall, I was really impressed with this WrestleMania. For somebody who hadn't really watched much wrestling in 9 years, I didn't really know what to expect going into this, but it was a really good event. So well done, WWE. One last piece of WWE news. It was announced yesterday, Friday, April the 3rd, that AJ Lee is going to be retiring from the WWE. She is a 3-time WWE Divas champion and also the wife of CM Punk, who has had his issues with the WWE and is no longer working for them. So a lot of people were caught off guard with AJ Lee retiring. I will say that I was caught off guard by it, but I'm also surprised that she didn't retire after all the stuff that CM Punk went through with the WWE, considering that they're married. So although I kind of expected her to leave at some point in support of her husband, I was still shocked that it happened. And since it happened, there is speculation on the internet that possibly she might be pregnant. Now, this is just pure internet speculation, so you gotta take it for what it is. Nothing serious at this point. But I wish AJ all the best in whatever she decides to do in the future. Sticking with sports, and the last thing I will be talking about this week is baseball is back. Baseball will be back on Monday. It's officially opening day. For those of you who listen to the podcast, you know that I'm a huge baseball fan. I love the Blue Jays. And I am thinking about doing a weekly Blue Jays podcast. Not that it will be taking over this podcast, but in addition to this podcast, I'm thinking of also doing a weekly Blue Jays review podcast if time permits me to do so. So if you're a Blue Jays fan and you're listening to this and you like the idea of hearing a weekly Blue Jays podcast, let me know. Leave me a comment if you're on YouTube or shoot me an email at Ocho Points Podcast at gmail.com and let me know if you'd like me to do that. If you have any other comments regarding this show, leave a comment on YouTube or shoot me an email. It's ochopointspodcast at gmail.com. OCHO points podcast at gmail.com. Once again, this week's sponsor was my Suplex City shirt, and I will link it somewhere on YouTube if you're watching there. And if you're listening to this on iTunes, then the link is teespring.com/SUPcity. As always, guys, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next week.